Recently, there has been much discussion in traditionalist circles regarding the Frankfurt School. This was a very influential group of theorists who inspired a particularly successful movement of applied Marxism. Even in his own lifetime, Karl Marx attempted to apply his theories in revolutionary action. When Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848, he was a leader of the Communist League. However, these early communists failed in their revolutionary attempt. Marx fled into exile and wrote Capital and other works. The first school of applied Marxism was revisionist Marxism, founded by Edward Bernstein. Revisionists advocated revolution through parliamentary gradualism. Their tradition endures in the social democratic parties of Western Europe. Marx himself rejected the Social Democrats. Most famous are the Soviet Marxists. Marxists who, as Bolsheviks, seized control of Russia in 1917. They are Marxist-Leninists. The Frankfurt School, through its Institute for Social Forschung, founded in 1923 at Germany's University of Frankfurt, developed a type of applied Marxism quite different from revisionist Marxism and Soviet Marxism. The Frankfurt School developed Freudo-Marxism, a theory which synthesized the theories of Sigmund Freud and Karl Marx into one corrosive, subversive force directed against Western civilization. Marxism, after Marx, who died in 1883, developed in response to failures of Marx's prophecies. Revisionist Marxism arose when the working class failed to become poorer and more militant as Marx had predicted. Marx had also predicted that the workers would develop a sense of international solidarity, would come to see that they had no fatherland. However, when World War I erupted in 1914, the workers first saw themselves as Germans, Frenchmen, Englishmen, and so forth. One great triumph for Marxism came out of the First World War, the Bolshevik seizure of power in Russia in 1917. The Bolsheviks, or Leninists, said that the revolution had failed in Western Europe because the capitalists in those nations had bribed their workers with loot stolen from their colonies. If revolution did not arise everywhere, according to Lenin, it could only be because colonialism and imperialism. In the late 1930s, the term racism was added. Bolshevism briefly seized power in Hungary and Bavaria in 1919, but soon lost. In Italy, Marxism suffered an even more stunning defeat. A former revisionist Marxist, Benito Mussolini, became a renegade and developed his own variety of nationalistic socialism, which he called fascism. The fascists totally suppressed Marxism. The founders of the Institute in Frankfurt, observing fascism in 1923, were quite alarmed. How could the working class go so wrong? Why did so many workers behave in an irrational manner? They concluded that the mass psychology of the workers had to be considered. They believed that the new theory of psychoanalysis, Freudianism, with its emphasis on irrational impulses and drives, would help explain why the workers had accepted fascism. Although the Frankfurt School had some tenuous links with Soviet Marxism, most notably through a Stalinist named George Lukács, they largely followed their own line of development. Thus, they were able to penetrate into the center of consciousness of the United States through the mass media and certain areas of higher education. Until 1933, however, the Frankfurt School was active only in Germany. The rise to power of Adolf Hitler, another National Socialist, whose movement was even more ethnocentric than that of Mussolini, forced the Frankfurt School into exile. They moved en masse to the United States and established the Institute for Social Research at Columbia University. The Institute of Social Research at Columbia was closed in 1950 when Max Horkheimer returned to Germany to play an important role in the denazification program. The reestablished institute largely ended with Horkheimer's death in 1975. The Frankfurt School developed a theory to explain the workers' acceptance of fascism. The capitalist system developed and sustained a type of family structure, a patriarchal family structure, which produced children with a particular character structure, the authoritarian personality. People who had authoritarian personalities accepted, sustained, and even promoted fascism. Fascism was defined to include any manifestation of nationalism, ethnocentrism, or racism that developed to a point of conscious political expression. From a pseudo-Marxist standpoint, people with authoritarian personalities were mentally unhealthy. They needed therapy. Since at least 10% of Americans had authoritarian personalities, it was obvious that mass therapy was needed. This went beyond the Freudian couch and talking to her. The mass therapy was to be carried out through the public education system and the mass media. The Institute for Social Research was most famous for its studies in prejudice. The authoritarian personality and dynamics of prejudice were the most influential among these. The late Christopher Losch, who is by no means a writer, concluded that the purpose and design of studies in prejudice dictated the conclusion that prejudice, a psychological disorder rooted in the authoritarian personality structure, could be eradicated only by subjecting the American people to what amounted to collective psychotherapy, by treating them as inmates of an insane asylum. Obviously, the Frankfurt School had an impact only because its theorists found thousands of followers in strategic areas of the mass media as well as in higher education. What was involved was too big to be a conspiracy, but so deliberate that it was not simply an outcome of self-generating social forces. One of Hollywood's favorite themes is the man-made monster called the golem. The mass media created the hippie as a direct antagonist to the authoritarian personality. The hippie is a golem who has served his creators well and who has not slipped out of control. The urban militant has been a less tractable creation. It is no accident that now one television program or motion picture after another hammers at the same themes: the stupidity of fathers, the children who know better than their parents, the liberated female who rejects motherhood. Above all, the white male is responsible for all that is wrong with the world. It is this never-ending psychological warfare waged against the white male which is the enduring legacy of the Frankfurt School. While America's patriots were fixated on the threat posed by the Kremlin, a group of cultural subversives seized control of the nation's opinion-forming apparatus without firing a shot. They deceived many by giving attention to Freudianism. Their successors have moved on to theories of deconstruction. The theories may change, but the actors remain the same. Their goal remains the same: the gradual but total obliteration of our nation and our people.
Karl Marx, over 150 years ago, wrote about his goal, or maybe it was his obsession. And he said it was the overthrow of all institutions. Karl Marx wasn't a reformer, somebody who wanted to make a bad situation a little bit better, tinker with the structure a little bit. He was a revolutionary. He wanted to overthrow the entire system in Europe. In fact, he wanted to overthrow the entire Christian, patriarchal, aristocratic order that had developed Europe the way it was. Well, his followers have been laboring for the last century and a half to achieve what Karl Marx dreamed of. Originally, they thought that those goals could be reached by using as their shock troops what Marx called the proletariat, or the working man. So for many years, communists tried to organize the workers. However, by the 1930s, the communist theorists, the Marxists, around a group called the Frankfurt School. They started off at the University of Frankfurt in Germany. After Hitler's rise to power, they moved to the United States almost lock, stock, and barrel. And they had begun to sour on the workers. They were a bit disillusioned by the American working man because the American working man was not a revolutionary. He didn't want to burn out the factory owner, seize the factories, kill the large farmers, murder businessmen, seize their resources. All the American working man basically wanted was a fair shake. He wanted the chance to enter the middle class. He wanted a chance for an education for his children. And through the work of the trade union movement and others and political changes that came over the years, the American working man largely gained what he wanted. So he was not a reliable ally or as a reliable revolutionary. And as early as the 1920s, Marxist theoreticians decided that they would use racial politics. In fact, it was Trotsky who said that perhaps the American Negro could be used as the shock troops for revolution, to do what the workers had not done. More recently, the idea occurred to people in the Frankfurt School, who were the ones who lay behind radical feminism, that gender politics could be used to overthrow the existing order. So you would have racial minorities organized, blacks particularly in the United States, now more recently Hispanics, and gender politics. That would be radical feminism and the homosexual agenda to attack the existing order. So racial and gender revolution, which something that is really called cultural communism.